All right, well, welcome everybody to tonight's lecture. It's always my pleasure to welcome everyone. I am Sadie Fair, I'm the director here. So tonight's presentation is always one of our favorite, especially with our presenter. But before we go into introducing Nick Zentner, I would like to first thank everyone for being here, for attending our lecture series, and especially thank all of our members in the audience for making our lecture series possible. It's their dues that go into making our lecture series possible, for making what we do here at the museum possible, from exhibits to collections to our programming. So if you're not a member, I highly recommend considering becoming a member. And then I would like to thank the Humanities Washington Speakers Bureau, because 3 of our presentations a year come from the Humanities Washington Speakers Bureau out of Seattle. Like our next one, in 2 weeks, Washington on Wheels, on October 24th at 6 p.m. will be through that series. I would also like to make a note, tomorrow night, or tomorrow afternoon, at 4 p.m., Nick Zentner will be presenting again. A special presentation here at the museum, which will also be streamed live. Central Washington's Greatest Hits Geologically. That will be pretty much a little bit of everything, except the kitchen sink. But it is a special presentation for the Leadership Kittitas County group. We will have a similar layout, but there will be a few reserved seats for their group, since it is a special presentation. So ultimately, you're here for tonight's presentation. So Nick really doesn't need an introduction, ultimately. You've probably all been at one or more of his presentations. You've heard the spiel. He has a BS in geology. He has an MS in geology. He's taught geology. He teaches geology. What else does he do?
He rocks.
He rocks. Yes, that is very true. He actually does have a program called Nick on the Rocks. He has won awards like the prestigious James Shea Award, a National Association of Geoscience Teachers Award, recognizing exceptional delivery of earth science content to the general public, and more. So I don't think I have much more to say other than welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to do my best to make it worth your while. We'll see if I get decapitated here with the ceiling fan. I'll try to stay close to home here in front of the microphone, especially for people towards the back, but occasionally I'll head towards the screen here. I would like to talk about plant fossils tonight, mostly in central Washington, but also maybe we'll dabble a little bit in Idaho and Oregon as well. It's a topic that I've never been particularly strong in, but people keep asking about plant fossils, and so I've tried to teach myself a fair amount about it. Many of you are locals. You know the valley very well. So where can we go find plant fossils? We can go over to Vantage, can't we? In the state park, at Ginkgo State Park, there's plenty of plant fossils. Those are the big trunks of petrified trees. We could also go up to Blewett Pass, can't we? Yeah. Especially on the old Blewett Road, and you found some plant fossils up there, some leaves, different kinds of trees. Up to Tanum, In Yakima River Canyon, up Badger Pocket. Oh, we got a telephone right off the bat. This is exciting. I'd like to say a special shout out to my mother who's watching on Facebook Live. I think there's 8 viewers, Sadie, and that's my mom's one of them. So hopefully we'll pick up a few. Hi, Mom. All right. So in addition to the plant fossils tonight, I would like to spend some time to talk about a gentleman by the name of George Beck, who was a teacher here at the college. He was the geology department at Central Washington University. It wasn't called that back then. But he was the guy from the mid-1920s until the late 1950s. And he single-handedly studied petrified wood and created Ginkgo State Park. So if we talk about plant fossils in Central Washington, we really want to talk about this guy. And a special note, George Beck's grandson is with us tonight in the room. I'm not going to point him out. I'll just let you try to, maybe the guy I'm sitting next to is grandson of George Beck. I wonder, I'll let you know who it is at the end if you want to chat with him a little bit. Okay, so that's our plan tonight. So of course, we're starting at the place that you assumed we would start, at Ginkgo State Park, the petrified forest. And that's over by Vantage, of course. We've all been there, right? We got 2 choices on how to get there from here in Ellensburg. We can stay on the old Vantage Road, up and over, right? And down we go. Or we can go on the freeway and we can take the exit at Vantage, 30 miles to the east of here, get off the freeway, work our way through Vantage, the little town, and get to the park. Fine. Okay, so before we get to the actual museum, before we actually get into the boundary of the state park, we go by this place. You've been there, right? All right, so this is the Ginkgo Gem Shop, Gifts and Souvenirs in Petrified Wood. Okay, my blood pressure is going up right now as we speak, and it always goes up when I drive by that place, especially if I have students in my van, because they're like, cool, dinosaurs. Why didn't you tell us dinosaurs roamed the world when these trees were here? In other words, we're given the impression outside of the state park boundary that dinosaurs and the petrified wood are from the same time and the same place. That's why my blood pressure goes up. It annoys me because this is not true. The dinosaurs and the petrified wood are not from the same world. They're separated by tens of millions of years. And I'll tell you why that's important in just a second. So why would I start a lecture where I'm all ticked off already? It's not a good move. Well, if we actually go into this mom and pop operation outside of the state park, this is what they have on the wall inside of the gem shop. When the dinosaurs roamed the earth, the ginkgo tree flourished as one of a large family of prehistoric plants all over the world. So there it is, right there. The dinosaurs and the ginkgos are representing this prehistoric world living in unity. Well, what the hell? Let's throw in some mammoths as well. More confusion. Some of us are laughing because we know that mammoths have nothing to do with dinosaurs. They're not the same thing, right? Mammoths are from the Ice Age, and dinosaurs are from a much different time, the Mesozoic era. And if we really want to go nuts with our problems, let's look at this. This is from a gentleman by the name of Wes Engstrom, who's also with us tonight from Liberty, Washington. And Wes was working on a sandstone up by Liberty and hit it just right and found a beautiful three-dimensional palm frond in the sandstones up at Blewett Pass, in the neighborhood of Blewett Pass. That a boy, Wes. Very nice. So proud of his find, and he should be. So if you're taking notes, and you are not required to take notes. This is a beautiful Thursday evening in downtown Ellensburg, and the weather could not be more perfect, and all the leaves are absolutely gorgeous. But if you wanted to take notes, this would be the slide, because these are 4 distinctly different times. Dinosaurs, palm fossils, petrified trees, mammoths. If you can't see those numbers from the back, the dinosaurs are from a time that's earlier than 66 million years ago. There are no dinosaur bones younger than 66 million years ago anywhere on planet Earth. The palm fossils are mainly from a time around roughly 56 million years ago. The ginkgo petrified log that we'll also find in Badger Pocket, and also find up on top of Menashtash Ridge, and also find down in the Yakima River Canyon, that's from 16 million years ago. And those mammoths, those Ice Age woolly mammoths or Columbian mammoths, are far younger than 1 million years ago. So if you go to Granger, Washington, south of Yakima, and you see statues of dinosaurs, it's cute, I get it, it's cute. But some truly believe that dinosaur bones have been pulled out of the rock layers at Granger. Mammoth bones have been pulled out of the hill, but not dinosaurs. Okay, have I beaten this point far enough? I mean, you're like, I thought we were talking about plant fossils. What are you into with all this mammoth thing? Well, I just think this is all right. Zentner was part of this. Dig up the Weenass in the area near Sealand. So I promise we'll get past these megafauna, but we do now realize, don't we, if we didn't know before, that these are 4 very different parts of our history. The only dinosaur bone ever found in Washington was found a left thigh bone of a T-Rex up on the San Juan Islands on the island called Sushi. Just one dinosaur, there's the fragment right there on the right. That's the only dinosaur bone that's been found. The other megafauna are mostly mammals from the Ice Age. Okay, we got it. So, for the rest of tonight, we're here. We're with plant fossils from these 2 time periods. Those 2 time periods. And we start with the palm fossils. So most of us know that if we want to look for these beautiful leaves, these beautiful fossilized leaves that are recorded in shales and sandstones, we got to go north. And even if you're from the Upper County, if you're from Cleella, this is a view from Peel Point, we got to go north. And if you hit the Stewart Range, you've gone too far. In other words, the palm fossils are in those foothills, south of the Stewarts, north of I-90. And I love history. This is the Historical Museum, and Sadie's done a beautiful job with these talks. I come down regularly to listen to these history talks. I love the old roads of Washington. And this is a stretch of the old Sunset Highway. This was the main road between Seattle and Spokane in the 1920s before the bridge was put in at Vantage in 1927. And we're going to go up on the old Blewett Road. So we all know Blewett Pass, that's US 97. Most of us are aware, however, that there's an old Blewett Road, and some of you are nodding your head furiously right now because you remember as a younger person being on that old Blewett Road when it was the pass. That means that was before 1956. That's when they stopped that. So that old Blewett Road right here, that squiggly yellow line is the old Blewett Pass Road, and that's where we're going to go. We love it because there's no traffic on it anymore. And we can park right in the middle of the pavement and have a good old time looking for plant fossils. And I recommend that you do that too if you're fired up by this particular topic. This is Echo Point, back when that Blewett Road was going on. It's still there. The pavement's still there from pre-1956. And one of my favorite old photos from people going up Blewett in the olden days. They're going up. They're backing up. And I'm not a mechanic, but it's something about gravity-fed fuel pump or line or something like that. So they all had to go up backwards up over the steepest part of Blewett Pass. Classic old shot. You know, if you drove from Spokane to Seattle or vice versa pre-1927, Blewett Pass was, I mean, you were waiting to cross that. That was a moment, you know. You crossed Snoqualmie Pass, you crossed Blewett Pass. Those are the 2 main passes to cross. And back in those days, there was no snowplow keeping the road open in the wintertime. I think the first time they kept Snoqualmie open was in the early 30s. So this is just a summertime pursuit of getting up and over these roads. Okay, so we're done with dinosaurs, we're done with mammoths, we're done with a little bit of human history. Let's dive into these plant fossils. Let's get our best friends and go up either to Tainham or upward towards Old Blewett and start looking for plant fossils. That's the topic of tonight's talk. I don't see them yet, you say. Well, those are sandstones and shales from the Swauk Formation 56 million years ago. And you can invite the favorite friends of yours. This was a field trip we led that was completely out of control. It was a circus. But we found a lot of plant fossils just in the half an hour that we were there. And you can get your chisels out, and your leather gloves, and your little screwdrivers, and your toothbrushes, and everything else, and have a grand old time. Okay, well, we're finally getting to some actual leaves pressed into the bedrock from 56 million years ago. And I'm just going to show you a bunch of photographs now, some taken by me, but most taken by professionals like these. These are from Tad Dilhoff over at the Burke Museum in Seattle. They've just I had a big grand opening of their new Burke Museum, if you're unaware of that. So all these wonderful plant fossils are recorded. I'm a geologist. If you start asking me about the details of these plants, I'm not going to have an answer, I'm afraid. But I do know something about why these plant fossils are where they are. And I do know something about 56 million years ago, which we're heading towards in just a second. All right, so we've got leaves of different kinds, but the most sexy of the plant fossils are these guys. And that's really what I want to hammer here tonight. No pun intended. Didn't mean that at all. Sorry. I got 2 brownies in me. Forgive me. Look at the size of these leaves. And they came from palm trees or palmetto bushes. What does that tell us about Central Washington 56 million years ago? Now, it just so happened that my wife and I took a spring break trip to Charleston, South Carolina. It wasn't an accident. I was working on this lecture, and I wanted to get some photos of some actual palm leaves. And did you know you could fly nonstop from Seattle to Charleston? There's a Boeing plant in Charleston, so there's a bunch of Boeing workers that you can sit with on a Monday morning. They're flying to Charleston, and then Friday night, you're all flying back with them, and they're all drunk in the airport bar. It's a great experience. The point is you get to Charleston pretty quickly. Did I say too much there? So what is Charleston, South Carolina today? Well, it's closer to the equator. It's warm. In fact, it's hot. It's humid. It's swampy. And that's what Blewett Pass area was like 56 million years ago. In fact, there was no mountain pass. It was topographically like Charleston, South Carolina. Here in Central Washington. That's the first major point. I slowed my voice down for dramatic purposes. You understand? Great. So, all sorts of shots showing the scale of these beautiful leaves. And this is what we had growing here in Central Washington 56 million years ago. We're trying to answer the question, why? Why was it so hot and humid here? Oh Lord, this sounds like a global climate preaching. I wasn't ready for this, you say. Well, hang on, I'm just going to give you some basics. This, for sure, based on our study of the Squawk Formation and other sedimentary horizons, is what Central Washington used to look like 56 million years ago. Let's study this map. We have no Cascade Mountains. We have a west coast of Washington at basically Seattle. We have a south coast of Washington. That's an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? It's like at Prosser, the south coast of Washington. And notice that there are rivers that are draining the state from northeast to southwest. Sluggish rivers, moving sand, silt, and clay from the ancestral Rockies into Central Washington. And this is our warm, let's say it, hot and humid, swampy conditions that our palm leaves are growing in. So, again, we're back to Charleston, but we're really visualizing Central Washington 56 million years ago. Why was it so hot and humid? Well, one way to answer the question is the Cascades weren't there. So we didn't have the rain shadow effect, which means we had a bunch of moisture coming into Central Washington, and we don't have it coming in anymore. We know about the rain shadow effect, right? It's wet on the west side, it's dry on the east side. Well, I agree that that helps us explain why it was wet here in Central Washington, but that doesn't explain the temperature, does it? We need it to be hot. Okay, well, I've been out with a lot of folks over the years, and some are kind of spitballing ideas about why they think it's so hot and humid from this time, 56 million years ago. These are actual shots, again, from my little iPhone in Charleston, South Carolina, taking little walks, quote unquote, through the swamps. We wanted to see a crocodile or an alligator. I never know which is which. We never did. But we see those palms, and we see these swamp cypress, and we see, isn't it amazing? And we see that very distinct ecosystem in today's South Carolina, Central Washington back then. So maybe you've said this to a neighbor. Well, have you heard of continental drift before? Yes. Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? We had palm leaves here because we were closer to the equator. 56 million years ago. In fact, we were maybe straddling the equator at that time. Well, is that true? Well, this map looks weird, doesn't it? This is a map of the world 200 million years ago during a supercontinent called Pangaea. Many of you have heard that name before. And I can control this with my thumb. And I'm going to do that right now. And I'm also going to reach up to the microphone. So what I'm doing is I'm breaking up Pangaea, and the numbers in the upper left are the numbers of millions of years ago. Let me get you to something that looks familiar. Now we're looking familiar, right? That's us. Let's go back in time and close the Atlantic Ocean and open the Pacific. And when we had Pangaea, we had one major continent. So these are in intervals of 10. So let's go to 60, right? We'll round up. Let's go to 60 million years ago and truly see if North America is straddling the equator to explain our warm, hot conditions. Well, are we at the equator? We are not. And this is not a guess, this is for sure. This is based on global data that's compiled for the last 60 years. We know exactly where these continents were at every moment in the last 200 million years. And the message is, during this hot time in central Washington, 56 million years ago, North America was further from the equator than it is now. We were actually further north than we are now. So it's not true. Let's bust another myth. We had palm fronds here for sure. It was hot and humid here for sure. It wasn't because we were at the equator. So what is the answer? The answer is, it was a globally hot time. 56 million years ago, we had palm trees in Alaska. 56 million years ago, we had hot and humid vegetation over much of our planet. There's a lot on this diagram, and I'd like you to ignore almost all of it. This is a cross-section. It's a side view of the Pacific Northwest with the Pacific Ocean on the left, and so I'll just point out. So these are the Cascades, and this is the Yakima Canyon. This is me at my desk, right? This is the White Bluffs, and this is Hell's Canyon. So we're going west to east. And what I tried to do here, just because I was getting confused, is I took all the names of the sedimentary rock formations across the Pacific Northwest and just grouped them by time. So everybody in red is Washington, everybody in blue is Oregon, and there's a few greenies here, and that's Idaho. And my point is, if we go down to 56 million years ago, this line right here, that's the Swauk Formation in central Washington, that's Guy Peak at Snoqualmie Pass, made out of the same stuff and same kind of rock. The Chuckanut Formation near Bellingham, that's all the same sandstones and shales from 56 million years ago. And there's a red line going through them all, indicating that that's the PETM, the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum. Thermal maximum, a global hot time. We haven't been nearly as hot globally since that 56 PETM event. And this is not the lecture to talk about why it was so hot then. We could go there sometime, but not right now. Okay, so our palm fronds are coming from that time. Let's leave central Washington and go over to Bellingham and see if they have some of the same kinds of fossils. That's the other side of the mountains now. Do they really have the same sandstones and shales? Yes. Do they really have the same palm fronds? Yes, they do. If we get in the hills of Bellingham and we strip away the vegetation because it's so wet over there, and we realize their sandstones and shales are intensely folded, if we get past all that, by God, they've got just as beautiful, maybe even more beautiful palm fronds, dare I say it, over there. From the same swamp, from the same hot, humid, global hot time. These are all photographs from Western Washington and also Tad Dilhoff at the Burke. All right? Palm fronds. Are they the same time as the petrified wood at Ginkgo Park? Nope. Nope. We're not there yet. We're just talking about the plant fossils that have been found around the Pacific Northwest If you find palm leaves, they're from that time. There were a couple of real recent dramatic landslides that revealed a bunch of new palm fossils that we didn't know about before. Look at these guys. Beautiful preservation that are just newly exposed 10 years ago during that landslide. Look at, isn't this gorgeous? Okay, we're leaving the palm fronds. We're leaving 56 million years ago. In a second, I guess we've got a few more. Oh, you've been up to Republic. You've been up to the Stone Rose Quarry where you can bring your family and you can collect and you can keep a few of them, right? Is that the way it works now? You can't keep everything, or you, whatever. It's been a while since I've been up there. But some of you know that area very well in northern Washington. Here's a few photos from the Republic Stone Rose Quarry. You are a little bit younger. Notice the dates are now going to be in the upper right-hand corner. So we're a little bit younger than our 56 hot time, but we're back in that neighborhood. And these photos from the Republic area are showing the remarkable preservation of birch leaves. Here's a rare ginkgo leaf preserved in the stone from 53 to 45 million years ago. A sycamore leaf, look at that, it's just like a leaf that fell this morning, isn't it? Alder, I'm reading these because I don't know them very well. I'm using my peripheral vision. Another ginkgo leaf, I don't have to read that one. These are super rare in the fossil record. Of course, we have beautiful ginkgo trees that they all lost their leaves this morning. Did you notice? It was the first hard frost and the sun came out, all those ginkgo leaves all went down in a heap. If you're real fascinated by that, just a block away, if you go on Pine, 1 block, I just took a little walk before this and saw all the ginkgo leaves down. Is that where the Ostranders used to be? What's the name of that floral place now? Ellensburg Floral. That's a good name. This is Ellensburg, and that's a floral. Ellensburg Floral. Even pine cones have been beautifully preserved in that Klondike Mountain Formation. A little bit younger, but basically in the same neck of the woods as our 56 hot. Furman, thank you for reading. And the reason it's called stone rose, there's truly delicate plants, roses that have been preserved. I'm hearing it was cooler times there a little bit. Yeah, we're getting away from our 56 hot, and so we're leaving our maximum, our thermal maximum. But of course, that's a main reason to study these plant fossils, not only because of their beauty or because it's fun to collect them, but if you have a collection of plant fossils throughout our history, we can say something about changing climate conditions, can't we? Locally and maybe even more regionally. Now, you might be surprised to see this in our plant fossils lecture, but we know what coal really is, don't we? It's buried plant material. And so when we get to the Roslyn Formation, which is, we're a little bit younger yet now, 45 to 40, we have an amazing amount of coal bed preserved here on this side of the mountains. And then there's an equally impressive collection of coal beds on the western Washington side, Black Diamond, for instance. Those are the same beds. They were once continuous, flat line, across Washington, and then the Cascades grew since that time. So, take plant material, bury, 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 you get different forms of coal. And occasionally, if we're screwing around in the Teanaway Community Forest near Roslyn, you can find some of these sandstone towers. This is my favorite, but you know some others as well. Cheese Rock and other places that many people know. Now, if we leave Washington, I don't have a whole lot to say. The farther we get from Ellensburg, the less I have to say. It's generally my rule. So, in the Painted Hills of the John Day Formation, there's beautiful plant fossils coming from that area. We're younger yet. We're almost at 20 million years ago. And I'll just let us enjoy this. There's a high school in Fossil, Oregon, where you can do the same kind of digging that you can up at Republic. And many of these are coming from that, it's truly called, a town called Fossil, Oregon. Fossil High School. If you're in the same conference as the Fossil, I wonder what I should look that up. What are they? The fighting, insert your own joke. Right. We're going to kill Fossil Friday night. All right. Winged fruit. Even the little helicopters we can play with from the maple tree are preserved. here. Isn't this amazing? So if you came tonight because you've been collecting plant fossils your whole life, this is where your interest is, in the delicate, beautiful preservation. And this other stuff about global climate and dinosaur, who gives a damn? I just want to look at some beautiful photographs of plant fossils. And that's what we're doing right now. Okay, let's continue with the program and leave 56 and even a little bit younger. And now let's go to another major time, which also is another major warm time. Not as quite as dramatic as the PETM 56 million years ago, but 16 million years ago there was a global warm time as well, called the Mid-Miocene Climatic Optimum, the MMCO. And so we have a lot of plant fossils here from that time. Let's not start at Vantage, let's go over towards Spokane, a very famous place to collect plant fossils called Clarkia, which is right on the edge of some of these huge flood basalts that many of us know a lot about. Oh God, we're back to this thing again? Yeah. So here we are at 16 million years ago, another red line. So we really only have two red lines that are talking about these thermal maximum times when we have this distinctive collection of interesting fossils to look at. And same idea, that Clarkia, the Latah beds in Spokane, Sucker Creek if you're really into this, Mescal, Picture Gorge, and then our big flood basalts are happening at the same time. And of course, that means we're talking about petrified wood in central Washington. So let's continue over there by south of Spokane at Clarkia, a place I've never been. Has anybody been to the Clarkia site? Okay. Oh, a couple in the back. Great. So, more beautiful photographs from Ted Dilhoff at the Burke Museum. He's been my main guide to put a lecture like this together, and I said, Ted, I just want to do a lecture of the best places to collect plant fossils in the Pacific Northwest. And he just started emailing me photographs. He said, well, you have to include Clarkia, you have to include John Day, you have to include a couple of other places. So these are the best of the best, at least what they have at the Burke Museum in Seattle and from his own photographs. Even pollen can be part of the story. Delicate pollen that's from trees, obviously, but we can learn a lot about climate conditions from pollen in the Clarkia beds. This is from a Tupelo gum tree pollen, and pollen from an elm, he reads. Also from that same area, nearby, the Latah Formation, otherwise known locally as Hangman Creek. So if you know, this is quite close to downtown Spokane. There's a golf course there, and you're kind of leaving downtown Spokane and heading south. There's some lake beds there. Some of them are from this time, and some of them are from the Ice Age time. But these are pre-Ice Age, 16 million years ago. Elm, this is oak. Okay, this is at the same time, and it's not an accident that we have all these wonderful lake beds at Spokane, because these incredible flood lavas are burying Washington in lava, and we're damming a bunch of rivers along the margins of that. So lots of our best plant fossils are coming from the edges of this flood basalt time. And most of you know this, but our lavas are coming out of cracks. They're not coming from the ocean, and they're not coming from a big mountain. The lavas, the flood basalts of central Washington came out of fissures or cracks, those little black lines that you see there. And the fissures had significant depth, and there was rapid rise of this very runny Hawaiian-like lava coming up through the cracks, and then there was so much material that were burying Washington in lava. So if you're at the source, if you're at the actual fissure or the vent of one of these lavas, there's spatter being thrown up into the air. Like this in Hawaii. This is not slow motion. This is a helicopter shot, and you can see all the gases coming up with the magma at one of these fissures. And this is what we want to visualize 16 million years ago happening here in central Washington. Why do we care? Well, we're going to bury a forest. We're going to take a forest with all sorts of different kinds of trees, and we're going to bury it in lava. And the particular lava flow that did most of the burying is called the ginkgo lava. And this is the actual crack or fissure that produced the ginkgo lava. Can you read this map carefully? The vent itself was at about Moses Lake, heading down to kind of like Walla Walla-ish. And then it's the orange that's the active lava from the ginkgo flow. And look at where that ginkgo flow made it. It made it to the Oregon coast in 2 different places. We're going to do a new PBS episode. We're going to try to film it next week if the weather cooperates at Seal Rock. If you know Seal Rock, south of Newport, that Seal Rock at the Oregon coast is lava that came out of this crack by Moses Lake. It's the ginkgo lava flow. So that same lava flow that buried trees at Vantage, that same lava flow crossed the Cascades, which were much lower at the time, crossed the Coast Range, which was much lower at the time, and made it to Central Oregon coast. So we got to find a lighthouse right on top of the ginkgo flow to really make sure we know we're at the coast visually, and then compare that. I'm talking out loud now. Onward. So some of those lava flows are no longer flat. We'll get to the petrified wood in just a touch. But they're no longer flat. They've been squeezed due to tectonic forces, and the squeezing of those layers have made ridges, the ridges that we all know and love in central Washington. The family from Prosser crossed 3 ridges between Yakima and Ellensburg, and there's another handful of ridges south of there. The Horse Heaven Hills above Prosser is another one of these places where the lavas have been folded. This is a little animation we made a while back for one of our programs to show that the Yakima River is actually older than the ridges. That the ridges started to warp and lift after the Yakima River got established. And this is actually site-specific. Can you place yourself here? Burbank Creek is this guy. So here's Burbank Creek. Here's the Eaton Ranch up here. What else? What other landmark do I have? Obviously, Ellensburg's up that way, and Yakima's down here. This is the most impressive site. Rosa Dam is right in here. Okay? Great. So why are we here? Is there really plant fossil material in the Yakima River Canyon? Absolutely there is. So here's some footage that we never used, and we lugged the cameras up from the road. So it's kind of crazy we never used it. So this is not color corrected, and there's no sound here for you. But I was tipped off by a few rock hounds as to where you can find petrified wood just laying loose on those steep slopes in the Yakima Canyon. Towards the Yakima side now. We're down near the county line on the east side of the river. Some of you, maybe in your younger days, were up there screwing around. That's all petrified wood from one particular horizon. And here's more just unused footage. It makes me feel better just to show this stuff because it's never been seen. So these are all little, this has not been worked, this has not been cut. It's just stuff that's laying around. Pick the windiest day possible to film. That's not a big deal. It's a good thing we don't have sound. Here's one more clip. We're right above Rosa Dam on the east side of the river, and there's places where logs were pulled out of the hill and then skidded down to the river, and I guess put into somebody's basement or something for posterity. So if you crawl in there, you can actually see the snapped off part of the log. But the point is, we're getting these trees from within the lava. Now let's ask ourselves, why would we have any remnant of a tree if it's in lava? Why wouldn't the tree, yeah, we're crawling in now to see them. Why would there be any wood? Wouldn't the whole thing just burn up? It's a fair question. Before we answer that question, we had Ray Foisey from Yakima, who'd been collecting on his own. He had petrified acorns from 66 million years ago, from 16 million years ago. Polished, of course. Here's one of his famous pine cones that he had studied, and they now have the name Pinus foisei. His last name is Foisey, so he's proud that that particular kind of petrified pine cone was named after him. So we're going to answer that question, how did the logs possibly survive all that lava? If we're pulling logs out of the lava directly, you recognize this, don't you? We're going south on I-82, we're heading to Yakima, this is Menashtash Ridge, Vanderbilt Gap. And if we get out of our car, as I did last summer, and walk on the median, I don't know if that's legal or not, but I was doing it, you all know that big white stripe on the east side that's almost vertical. And here's another shot of it. We're looking east. Badger Pocket is kind of right over the ridge there. There's beautiful petrified wood up there. And that's the same layer of petrified wood that we were just looking at in the Yakima River Canyon. And, spoiler alert, this is the same layer of petrified wood we're going to see over at Vantage. In other words, these layers continue through the county, but they're at different elevations because of all this tectonic folding that we've had since then. And you're like, well, I don't see any logs here. In fact, I just see a bunch of white mini layers in between two lava flows. And you're true, you're correct. But this is something called a pillow zone. So this is a whole bottom part of a lava flow that has a bunch of these things we call pillows. Pillow basalt. And pillow basalt tells us that water was present. The lava was going into a lake, and it was the lake water that saved the trees. The trees that were under the lake level were protected from the heat of the lava. So they were petrified. The wood was converted into silica, but we need the water there to preserve the logs. That's a key point. So here's a sketch from Jack Powell, a DNR geologist from long ago. Here comes the ginkgo basalt flow. I wish he had it coming in from the right, because that's the sense of this. The ginkgo's coming from the east. But the point is, we're going into this temporary lake called Lake Vantage. It's fresh water. This is not the ocean now. But those logs are able to remain as logs because of that water. Here's Jack himself last summer showing me that there's a couple of logs right up there at Vanderbilt Gap, right above the northbound viewpoint area. So our first look at a petrified log. We'll get plenty more looks here in just a second. So these have been studied through the years, the petrified logs, the different kinds of trees. And again, from Tad Dilhoff at the Berkeley Museum, we have all these wonderful preservations of different kinds of trees that are all found together at Ginkgo and Yakima Canyon and Vanderbilt Gap, etc. Okay, so we answered how the logs were able to survive the lava, because it is rare. By the way, we're going to talk about this fellow George Beck in just a second. We're going to finish the program with him. But when he started publishing about the petrified logs that he was discovering and studying, he wrote in his scientific papers that the logs were coming right out of basalt lava, and everybody said he was full of baloney. Like, there was actually like anger, like this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's talking about logs that are in lava. That's impossible. If you go to northern Arizona and look at that petrified wood, that's not lava. If you go to any other place around the world and look at petrified logs, they're not coming out of lava. So we have a lot of petrified logs here. Okay, there's other places that have petrified wood. But to pull them out of a pillow zone at the base of a lava flow, that is unusual. And it took a long time for Beck to get people to take him seriously. So let's finally enter now this state park and talk about the role of George Beck, as well as the wonderful geology that's down there. We started with this. We're looking at it again. We're not going to show any more pictures of dinosaurs. And we are still, reminder one last time, 16 million years ago. So the logs are carefully found in one layer. Do you see them in this sketch? So here's a bunch of layers that are older than the ginkgo lava flow. We don't care about them. They don't have petrified wood. Here's something called the Vantage sediment that's about 30 feet thick, and that's a key marker bed for us, but there's no petrified wood in the Vantage sediment either. Instead, all of these logs are found at the bottom of this guy, the ginkgo flow. So there's 300. There's 300 of these lava layers, one on top of another, and only a couple of them have petrified wood in them. And only one has a major forest horizon, and that's our friend, the ginkgo flow. There is one last mystery coming before we quit. But here's the scale of these lava flows. Look at these things. There's a truck. There's one lava flow, another lava flow, and a portion of a third. So these are monster lava flows, very, very thick, and they traveled a long way. But it's the ginkgo flow that has the petrified logs coming right out of the base of the pillow zone. And each time we have one of these lavas cross central Washington and cool and harden, we bury the ecosystem that was there before. And if this is the ginkgo lava flow, it's not. This is a picture in Hawaii, of course. But if this was the ginkgo flow 16 million years ago, every one of our petrified logs would be buried. We'd have none of them to look at. How do we see them now? Well, there's been the folding, and there's been erosion by rivers and the Ice Age floods to basically naturally excavate these incredible logs. We would otherwise have no chance to see them. So there's been some new displays installed just a few months ago at Ginkgo, not at the museum overlooking the river, but at the trailside facility. And I'm showing you the sketches done by hand by an artist, and then the finished sketches to show some of these concepts that we're talking about. So if you want to see these finished pieces of art, they are now at the base of the trail. I'll show you. This is my favorite spot. Many of you probably know there's one famous standing log that remains. There probably were more, but they're gone. If this one's protected within the walls of the state park, it's quite a hike though from the museum. And this is how I learned about it, just finding this old postcard. Maybe you've heard about it other ways. But since then, I've been out there and other people that say, how do you get out there? I'd love to find that thing. And I give them basic directions on how to hike out there. We're across the river from the horses sculpture that you know on the east side of the river. More artist renderings of that forest that existed in central Washington 16, not 56, 16 million years ago, and picturing the same kind of hot and humid conditions. Now we do have the Cascades, but the Cascades are lower than they are currently. But the real mystery that remains, and I promised one more mystery, the mystery that remains is, why are there so many different kinds of logs, different kinds of trees that are sitting there together today? Let me repeat that. It's one thing to say there's hundreds and hundreds of petrified logs at Ginkgo. That's cool enough. But when you really start looking at the kinds of species, there's like 36 different kinds of trees that are all sitting next to each other. And the mystery is, how is it possible to have them all together now? I'm talking about, I'm not making this up now, a fossilized redwood sitting next to a fossilized oak, sitting next to a fossilized ginkgo, sitting next to a fossilized sweet gum, sitting next to a fossilized maple. In other words, we know about those trees. Those trees thrive at different elevations and different, right? You can't have all these trees growing right next to each other in a natural environment today. Douglas fir, something else. They all represent different environments. So the mystery is, how are you going to get all those trees together? Did the ginkgo lava somehow get them all together? Or did all those trees get collected naturally somehow from different elevations, and then the ginkgo flow buried them? Most everybody today, by the way, it's still a mystery, really. But the leading idea is that you can take all those trees from different elevations by sweeping them downslope by a volcanic lahar, a volcanic mud flow. Can you remember St. Helens 40 years ago? That's 40th anniversary next May, by the way. And we all remember the ash falling out of the sky. But we also remember, don't we, that big mud flow that came down the Toutle River and wiped out the bridge and got down to I-5 and almost took that bridge out? That was like a slurry of liquid concrete. Let me show you some video. This is not St. Helens, but another volcanic mud flow. Actually, this is St. Helens right here. And can you see how we could take trees from different elevations and get them weather-beaten and jumbled up and then deposited down low somewhere? This is the leading idea for why we have all that wood at Vantage. It was a Cascade volcano eruption bringing all those logs to Vantage. In other words, there wasn't all the the trees weren't all standing and growing at Vantage. They were from different locations and were swept to Vantage for them to be buried. But here's why I think it's still a mystery. Each of these, we're back up on top of Menashtash Ridge, and this Vantage sediment is right below that pillow zone with all the wood. There's no petrified wood in the Vantage. If there really are a bunch of mud flows in the Vantage sediment, where's all the wood? We just saw, let's do it. We just saw that If we have a mud flow, we're going to carry a bunch of trees down with the volcanic mud. And so if you go to the Vantage and you go, well, there's 25 different mud flows that make the Vantage sediment. Well, that's fine, but we're not finding the logs in the Vantage. We're finding it in the lava flow above the Vantage. So to me, this is still an open question and interesting to study. Back in the early days of Ginkgo Park, they were not talking about lahars. They were talking about big floods coming down the Columbia and thinking that those logs came from the Okanagan somehow, catastrophically, and then buried by the Ginkgo lava flow. Notice also they don't have any Ice Age floods in this sketch. This is at Vantage where we now know there were major Ice Age floods coming down. But the Ice Age floods is too young for our petrified wood story. Okay, we're finishing tonight with an ode to this gentleman, George Beck. A photo of him when he started at Central in 1925. And he and some students, Ted Frechette was his right-hand man, and a few other co-workers, friends, and students, and maybe former students after a few years, were starting to find logs. And it's not until recently I realized they put the bridge in at Vantage in 1927, and they started putting in the road down through Frenchman Coulee and then up where we have the old Vantage Highway. Putting that road in meant digging. And so many of these logs were discovered as they put the old Vantage Highway in 1927. So that's not a coincidence that we're putting in this main road in the late 20s, and that's also the time that Beck and his students are finding these logs. So black and white photos of discovered logs, and now Beck is developing an expertise in studying those logs. Artwork again from the new displays. Again, if you're fuzzy where these are, I'll show you in just a second. And so the plan was, and Beck and others were gifted at working with the state to develop a park. Let's preserve these logs before they all get taken into people's basements. And so the Trailside Museum, which is 2 miles away from the Columbia, was built first, and a trail system from one log to the next, still in their found position in the hills. And then the main museum was built later on. Let's skip that. So this is back in the Depression time, and we have the CCC coming in to build these facilities by hand. I have to share this with you. So this is Beck writing about this Trailside Museum area. As can be seen from the above photographs of the Vantage area, the area is rather a bleak one. Very hot in summer, very cold in winter, and likely to be windy at all times. There are almost no trees. But the major feature of the park is, of course, the petrified logs. And he goes on to say, basically, we need a good museum. We can't just have people walking around finding these logs in their natural state because it's so uncomfortable in the summer and the winter. Like this. This is right after a big fire that came through a year and a half ago. I mean, I think people stop and they want to see this petrified forest, and they're walking around in this on a 110-degree afternoon. Not exactly a romantic spot. But the logs are there if you're really into it. And again, we're at this trailside spot, not the museum overlooking the Columbia. So if you want to see those new pieces of art and the new display, it's right here at this spot here. And you're like, I don't recognize that. Well, you recognize it now. It's back at a big event they must have had in the, what do you think, the 40s or the late 30s or something, looking at those cars. So this structure is still there. Here it is today. And inside of this is a little locked area that is no longer locked, so you can go in yourself. It's kind of a self-serve deal, and you'll find a bunch of new panels in there that are nicely done by state parks. Now, if we cross over to the Columbia River itself, this is that same museum, built at the same time, thanks to Beck and others doing the work on the petrified wood. So Trailside Museum on the left, the same vintage museum, roughly, overlooking the Columbia. And that is also there, of course. And there's still living human rangers working there. And some of the displays are from the olden days, but some have been updated as well. Okay. Let's learn a little bit more about George Beck. He did a lot of publishing on these woods and was an authority on fossils in the Pacific Northwest. mostly plants, but then he moved on to vertebrate fossils later in his career. Lots of different publications. Now this guy is teaching at Central. He's not only teaching geology, he's teaching music. So he's splitting time between two academic departments, and yet he apparently just had unlimited energy. An amazing amount of work done in a relatively short amount of time. And much of his research was done by looking at the detailed cell structures of these different kinds of woods, cutting the logs, polishing them. He even had a little club called the Fossil Woods of the Far West. They even had letterhead. And he was communicating to his fans, basically, by letter, by newsletter, about the latest discoveries in his research. This was a major hobby for many in the area, and though not nearly as popular as it was back then. And other shots that I've found over the years, just scattered little magazine articles, and this is one of my favorites. So here's George with a petrified student. Again, that's his honestly did not plan that, I promise. They're up at Blue Lake, looking at the Blue Lake rhino. And George, a little later in life, talking to, I think this is Mr. Thompson, who ran a gem shop in town here and lived on Craig's Hill. And even in 1965, some little newspaper articles. But I had precious little about George Beck for most of the last 25 years. And I kept thinking, you know, I should do a display on this guy. I should give a presentation on this guy. But I only have these little clips here and there, these little scraps of things here and there. I don't have much to work with. There's a mural from his retirement from Central that's now in the Art Museum, done by Sarah Spurgeon, who was a colleague of his at the time. And, you know, I'm dinking around making some video programs, and we're crawling around in some of the holes that are right up by ryegrass, basically. And you can, if you stop illegally and crawl into the holes, you can find some of the logs. And many of the logs that are lying on the ground surrounding the museum are those logs that were pulled out when they put in I-90. So it's another construction time when there was another kind of boost in discovery. But I was kind of at a standstill. I just didn't have much to work with George Beck himself. I'm still screwing around with video. Had a buddy at Crescent Bar take us across the river to film at West Bar, make a program for our TV show. But along the way, he showed me there was a cool spot that had some petrified logs hanging above the Columbia River. And I'm like, seriously? You got to show that to me. And so he showed it to me, and I was so into it, I didn't even forgot to take a picture. And this guy came back a few months later and said, I just bought a drone. I was so impressed with what you guys are doing. And I took my drone and I flew it up. And I want to show you what I captured with my drone. So do you see the little toothpick on the right there? That's a couple 100 feet above the Columbia. And let's zoom in. So think of the crazy coincidence that we've got the Columbia River digging, we've got the Ice Age floods carving, and we happen to have this log that's in position amongst these pillows during this time. So nobody knew about that log, including Beck, and I don't know what we're going to do with it. I'm trying to convince the producers to make an episode on this, but she's not buying it at the moment. So the only other thing I had on George Beck for about 25 years was this copied portion of one section of George Beck's journal from 1933 to 1936. That's all I have. So I had a guy from Yakima about a year and a half ago say, hey, I heard you were talking casually about George Beck. I think he's still got a relative living in Yakima. And I said, oh, really? Could you put me in touch with him? And so this guy did. He said, well, yeah, I know where he is. You know where the Fred Meyer is in Yakima? Yeah. He said, well, right behind Fred Meyer, there's this saddle and tack repair place. And that's George Beck's grandson who runs that operation. Maybe he'd at least want to chat with you about his grandpa. And so I went in there a couple summers ago, unannounced, and pretended I wanted to buy a saddle. I didn't really want to buy a saddle. And there's George Beck's grandson. And so we struck up a conversation, and he said, well, yeah, well, I might have a couple of things. Why don't you come back another time, and maybe I'd have something for you to look at. Maybe a paper or two of George Beck. And so I kept going back to this saddle repair shop every few months and learned more and more about Granddad, George Beck, from his grandson, also named George, by the way. Well, before we know it, I'm being showed old 78 records, which are radio interviews that George Beck did in the 40s with a regional radio program. And instead of a copy of one of the journals, the actual original journals of George Beck doing all this detailed work with wood and then mammals was in these volumes. And grandson George said, yeah, I think I've seen enough of you. I think you should take these. I think you should take care of these and make sure they get into the right hands or use them however you see fit. So that was a major act of generosity that I still appreciate. And those journals were given to me. And then I contacted the people at the Burke Museum who I knew had a bunch of Granddad George Beck's materials. And they only had copies of one of Beck's journals. And so they were very interested in talking to us. And so I took grandson George, and we went over to the Burke Museum a few months ago and met the caretakers of the George Beck plant collection material. And two brothers, the Dilhoff brothers, and a woman professor, I can't remember her name at the moment, but they are the paleobotany people at the Burke Museum who knew Beck's material backwards and forwards and had tried to research as much as they could without the original journals. And so in these amazing amounts of drawers, there's all these plant fossils from other people, but also from George himself. And so after dealing with them for a while and actually seeing some of the handwritten stuff from Granddad from back in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, it was decided that we would give those journals to the Burke. And they made copies, very good copies, for us here at Central to keep all that information in one place. I kept visiting grandson George, though, and George kept finding more and more things in the back room. Oh, I found another photo. So this is grandson. In one of the classrooms, here's Grandpa. And so at the time, grandson George was living in Ellensburg, and Grandpa was living in Ellensburg on 5th Avenue. And so there was a lot of grandpa-grandson time. Then I kept visiting grandson George, and now we find old photos from the early days of George Beck. Here's Beck in the middle with a fiddle on a field trip in the 20s. Here's Beck on another field trip up the Grand Coulee in 1940. These are priceless photographs, none of which had been viewed by anyone. 1930, Blue Lake cargo trip, or camp trip, sorry. So they've got some sort of jury-rig thing for breakfast, I guess, or maybe dinner. They got cornflakes in the back of that jar. This is my favorite from 1927. Beck and his students on top of Steamboat Rock. Look at the clothes. Isn't this wonderful? An iconic shot by Bob and Ira Spring of Beck in the hard hat with his students with the petroglyphs at Vantage before the dam was constructed. And so, the details of George Beck's life has been fleshed out, and the detail of the petrified wood has been fleshed out. But it's never over. We continue to learn, and there are some folks who are studying plant fossils now and making more leaps forward with our understanding. This is the building where we have our department now, and if that looks familiar to you and you know how to find it, you are welcome to come and visit me on the first floor. And just down the hall, I put together a brand new display honoring George Beck and these photographs that were donated to me by grandson George. So George, would you raise your hand, please? Grandson George, where are you? There you are. Thanks, everybody. If you want to visit with grandson George, he's right back there. If you want to visit with somebody else about anything, I suppose that's allowed. Thanks for coming, everybody.